Hello everyone, welcome back to the dannphan channel. We're picking up where we left off in our One Piece episode by episode reviews with episode 2. I read the comments. I realized that for my first One Piece review, I approached it wrong. So I'm going to correct that in this review right now. Now I can review One Piece. YouTube men only want one thing, and it's disgusting. I will say episode 2 I liked a little bit better than episode 1, just a little bit though, just like a smidge. I think overall the action scenes in episode 1 were a little bit stronger, but of course episode 2 is introducing a villain character who is quite fun in both the original source and in this live action adaptation, Buggy! And for this episode we kind of focus on doing the Luffy vs Buggy fight, so that was exciting. As per usual, let's get into our episode breakdown and I'll share some of my thoughts with you guys. So we open up the episode continuing where we left off on Luffy's flashbacks. In the first episode, we kind of reveal how Luffy got his devil fruit powers. And now in this episode, we finished that whole side story by wrapping up how Luffy was kidnapped, saved by Shanks, and Shanks of course gave him the straw hat. Very much like the first episode, these flashbacks are once again spliced apart into like 5 or 8 minutes at a time, scattered around the episode, which is something I don't like. I don't like bouncing around, but I'll try to not complain about it too much because I know you guys will get annoyed at me. We jump back to the present and we see Nami once again trying to break into the safe. And in the safe we find out is the map that shows how to get to the Grand Line. Although they're not really able to figure it out quite yet, but you know, anime watchers already know. She then explains kind of the outline of the world, how there's a red line, mass of land that just goes all around the world, and then the seas are split up and it's northeast, Grand Line goes across there. You get the drift. Just a little bit of world building until finally Buggy attacks, and he attacks with these smoke bombs that put them to sleep. Before they all fall asleep, of course, Luffy takes the map of the Grand Line and swallows it. That does seem like a Luffy thing to do, although I'm sure it will cause many innuendos and awkward Photoshop edits. You planned that, didn't you, Netflix? Sure enough, when they wake up, they find that they've been kidnapped into Buggy's circus, and the audience are his prisoners, forced to clap and laugh along with his show. Now, Buggy in this live-action adaptation really does just steal the spotlight for this episode. The live-action approach to him seems to be going in a slightly more edgier direction, but it's not too much. It's not so much that you don't see Buggy for the goofy asshole that he really is. I think he's just trying to do like a much more lighthearted Heath Ledger impression when it comes to doing Buggy, but the actor really does like sell the role. If this guy was played by any other actor, I don't think it would have worked as well, honestly. He is quite the whiny asshole while also being kind of intimidating, and I think they did a decent job with that. So Buggy wants the map of the Grand Line, and he's prepared to interrogate them in order to get it. Nami, of course, doing her thing, decides to trick Buggy and escape. That doesn't really work out for her. So instead, Nami and Zoro get pulled away to the green room where Nami is put into a cage and Zoro is tied up to one of those spinny knife flurry at things. I don't know what they're called. Don't judge me. I ain't no clown. We also get to see Helmeppo and Kobe now in their Marine Cadet uniforms as Garp arrives on scene to kind of figure out what the heck happened here. Figure out where, of course, Luffy is, since he knows that Luffy was kind of responsible for Morgan's being beaten up. I do like that while we're following Luffy and his friends, we're also keeping up with what's going on with Kobe and Garp who are going to be chasing after them. I like that. I'm really interested in seeing more of Kobe and Helmeppo becoming buddies like they are in the series. Even more so, I want to see more of Garp actually training these two, because I do like Garp, as you can already tell from my first episode review. While Zoro and Nami are tied up in the green room, Luffy is being tortured by Buggy, and for some reason Buggy thought the best way to torture a stretchy man is by stretching him more. Luffy does not seem very bothered by it. I don't know why that was his first method of torture. Stretch out a guy whose powers are to stretch. But for some reason Buggy thought that would hurt him. I don't know. And while Luffy isn't cracking on where he hid the map, Buggy notices his straw hat, realizes that it once belonged to Shanks, and gives a little backstory about how he used to know Shanks. He goes even further by taking a kid from the crowd and threatening to now hurt the kid. So Luffy breaks out of the ropes that were restraining him and punches Buggy right in his face, knocking his head clear off. Of course, his head falls into the lap of an audience member, and we all know he's fine, because that's his devil fruit power to split up his body parts and control them apart from each other. Now, I gotta say, I don't mind this scene, but I do enjoy how they revealed his powers in the anime better. In the anime, Zoro originally fights Buggy one-on-one and cuts Buggy up. And then, Buggy kind of does a whole show where he pretends to be dead on the ground. His crew just laughs, and they don't understand why they're laughing. And it's revealed that Buggy's perfectly fine because he can't be cut up, because that's just how his devil fruit works. He's the chop fruit. In this live action version, it seems like he combats physical blunt damage as well, because when Luffy punches him, he just splices that part of his body off, and it doesn't really seem to do any real damage to Buggy. So they make him a little bit more of a threat to that extent, but it's also not really what I'm familiar with when it comes to what Buggy's powers actually are. He is supposed to be vulnerable to blunt damage, from what I understood. But moving on, Buggy theatrically tricks Luffy and manages to get another smoke bomb off in his face before punching him out. Cutting over to Zoro and Nami again. Nami's trying to pick the lock on her cage while Zoro is approached by one of the crew members who reveals, that he killed his brother, and now he's like super angry and he's gonna throw knives at him while he spins on the knife throwing spinny thing. I gotta admit, not really interested. It's not a very interesting scene. But like I said, Buggy really does steal the spotlight of this episode. Moving on, Luffy wakes up in a dunk tank that's filling up with seawater, which is of course a devil fruit user's weakness. Natural weakness is the sea. And Buggy continues interrogating him, trying to figure out where the heck this map is. I gotta say, it's kind of funny going from one interrogation scene with Buggy and Luffy to another interrogation scene with Buggy and Luffy. It's like, okay, stretching him out didn't work. Duh. So let's put him in a tank with seawater, since that's a devil fruit user's natural weakness. But Buggy, why didn't you start with the tank of seawater? That would have been a much more effective starting point, don't you think? Why were you wasting your time before? I mean, I'd like to sit down with the writers who wrote this outline for this episode and just explain to them. You can't go from one interrogation scene to another interrogation scene. Just do it all in one go, man. Nami breaks out of her cage, and Zoro kind of uses the knife to untie himself from the wood spinny thing, and he chokes out the guy while Nami unties the rest of them, which is pretty badass, of course. They come to Luffy's rescue, and Nami breaks the tank, letting Luffy go. I find it a little bit curious that we didn't see any other crew members of Buggy's is. Even Buggy mentions it. He's like, where are my freaks? And then Zoro just comes out and he's like, they're not coming. But it's like, did you fight them off screen? I would have liked to see that. I spent all this time watching, like, this guy throw knives at Zoro, but I didn't see an actual fighting scene. And even before they, like, go to save Luffy, Nami is like, oh, let's kick the ass of every clown we see. Like, we're gonna see them fight a bunch of different henchmen, but we don't. We don't see them fight anyone else. They just show up. Buggy mentions that his henchmen aren't there. Yeah, I guess it all happens off screen. Kind of a bummer, honestly. But yeah, as Luffy finally gets out of the tank, he's gasping for air and ends up throwing up the map that he swallowed before. So of course, Buggy gets his hands on it, and naturally, they want to get it back from him. So we engage in a fight scene. Now naturally, Zoro can't cut Buggy. They reveal it way later, of course. Nami can't really do much either, and Luffy can't really do much either, because when he punches Buggy, he just splices off that one part of his body. So they're like, oh my gosh, how do we beat this guy? And they come up with the teamwork plan to take all of his individual spliced up body parts and then throw them into the chests that are just hanging around. So this way he won't be able to bring them back. There is a scene like that in the anime. He only has his like hands, feet, and head, and he like tries to make a little body with that, and they recreate that scene in its full goofiness. I was pretty shocked, honestly, how much of the goofiness they kept in. I will say, I'm not usually one to criticize filmography, but the shots in One Piece are very hit or miss for me. Some of them are like really cool and dynamic looking, and then some of them are like this one shot of tiny Buggy, where it's just way too zoomed in to really appreciate what you're looking at. Moving on, Luffy does his Gum Gum Bazooka and completely obliterates Buggy, throws him out of the tent. They got their map back, and they head out. After, of course, saving all of the prisoners that Buggy had. We end Luffy's flashback scene by seeing Shanks give him the hat. Not as good as the anime in my personal opinion, but still very emotional, of course. The nostalgia always hits me. We end with, just like in the original series, Buggy stabbed Luffy's hat, so it was damaged, and we get the scene of Nami fixing it for Luffy, which is very sweet. Before, of course, Nami kind of turns away from her fellow crew members to reveal this tiny little snail phone. It's kind of like a little earbud snail that she like dials there. And you know, I don't think that was in the original One Piece, but I kinda like it. I kinda think it's cute, you know? I gotta hand it. She calls up with this little earbud snail phone and lets them know that she has the map. Now, for those of you who, of course, seen the original series, you know who them is. The map, in a way, is kind of like serving as the MacGuffin of the One Piece series. I don't really have a huge issue with it. Anything to just bring these characters together quicker, I suppose. One thing that I did forget to talk about in my first episode review of One Piece is that every time they introduce a new enemy pirate, they flash their bounty on screen, and they show like the wanted poster, and it's like super dramatic, and then the villain or the pirate like does something to interact with the wanted poster, like just flipping it away or slicing it. And it is actually pretty cool. It's a pretty cool way of like introducing all the villains, and it gets me pumped. I forgot to mention it in my first episode review, so I had to mention it here. It is something that I actually like. They added a way of introducing each of the villains more dramatically. It's fun. It's a fun idea, I like it. Not everything new in the One Piece live action show is necessarily bad. Right now, my biggest problems with it is kind of just, I don't know, like the outlines of the episodes, I guess. I don't like how they're all splicey. I don't like how quick some certain scenes go by while other scenes last way too long. I guess pacing is a little bit of an issue. And like I said, I do think how they introduced Buggy's powers in the original was much better, was much stronger than how they do it here. But it's not terrible either. It's not something that I'm necessarily enraged about. And most of everything that happens in this series so far is pretty accurate, more or less, to how it was done in the original. So there's not too much to complain about. I do love how they did Buggy's character. It's not one for one, but it is kinda more or less the same vibe that you get from Buggy, is that he's like just kind of a whiny asshole and kind of intimidating when you first get introduced to him. So it kind of fits to have sort of this mix of Heath Ledger and also kind of whiny, kind of goofy. So I did enjoy this episode a little bit better. It's a little bit more focused. I don't know if I would rate it much higher than the first episode, though. It's kind of like around the same ballpark, kind of like still in the 6 area. Maybe like a 7, but closer to a 6 than an 8. If I were doing 0.5s, I might say it's a 6.5, but meh. I don't want to do 0.5 scores. So that was episode 2 of One Piece. Let me know what you thought about this episode, what you would personally rate it in the grand scheme of all the One Piece episodes. Where does it fall on your tier list? If you don't know this already, I do write my own comics and you can go check them out at burningstarcomics.net. I highly recommend that you do. Also subscribe and join the fan club if you'd like to see sneak peeks of more of my newest comics coming up. We'll have another One Piece episode review for you next week, and yes, on your request, I'll keep the hat. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
Program restart.